Deep in the summer forest, a Navy SEAL on leave believed the world had finally given him peace. Until a terrified scream tore through the trees. A young woman hung from a fraying rope above a pit, crawling with starving crocodiles, while two tattooed men counted down to cut it, and just as the rope began to snap under her weight, the SEAL burst out of the bushes at full speed, leaping into a fight no one could survive. Before we dive into this story, hit like, share, comment, and subscribe, and tell me, who do you think this mysterious girl really is? Your guess might change everything. The summer forest lay quiet under a heat-thickened sky, the air slow and heavy above the tree line. Jack Mason moved through the brush with the practiced calm of a man who had walked far more dangerous terrain than this, gathering fallen branches to stack for the evening fire. He had returned to this deep piece of Montana wilderness 2 months earlier, seeking a place where silence did not feel like judgment and where every rustle of leaves was not a reminder of a battlefield. Rex padded beside him, alert but relaxed, the easy rhythm of a creature trained for threat yet yearning for peace. The two of them had survived explosion, gunfire, loss most of all, the kind that left invisible bruises pressed against the ribs. Jack thought often of Mark Hart, the teammate who had shoved him behind a collapsed wall moments before the blast swallowed him whole. Jack had lived, Mark had not. And for reasons Jack could not unwind, Rex had taken the loss nearly as hard as he had. They were both recovering, wrestling with ghosts, learning the shape of stillness. Jack's cabin, tucked against a slope where pine roots gripped the earth like knotted fingers, had become their retreat. He had told himself he would spend the summer healing, staying put, letting the forest mend him. But fate rarely respected plans forged in quiet hours. The scream shattered the stillness before his thoughts finished forming. One sharp note, fear pulled taut, raw enough to jolt his entire body. Rex froze for half a heartbeat, ears up, throat vibrating with a low, warning rumble. Jack dropped the wood in his arms without thinking. "Direction?" he whispered. Rex turned toward the sound, tail stiff, muscles coiled. Another scream ripped through the trees, thinner this time, as if the voice had been scraped against stone. Jack's pulse snapped from calm to combat ready. He heard in it the same frantic pitch he'd heard from civilians trapped under debris overseas, the unmistakable sound of someone moments from dying. The forest blurred as he ran, Rex matching his pace, weaving through the undergrowth with lethal grace. Jack's mind switched to the cold precision that had kept him alive in chaotic places. Identify, assess, act. No hesitation. No wasted breaths. The wooden bridge came into view through the foliage, stretching across a stagnant swampland mottled with mud, reeds, and dark shapes shifting beneath the water's surface. Jack knew the place well enough. He had avoided it because Rex disliked the scent of rot that lingered there. Today it was filled not with silence, but with a woman's desperate crying. She was suspended upside down from the railing, ankles bound to a frayed rope, body swinging just a few feet above the water. Below her, the murky shapes resolved into alligators drifting closer. On the bridge, 2 men crouched over the knot, both armed with knives and the easy arrogance of people who assumed no one would see them. Their voices carried, mocking, impatient. Jack felt his breath narrow, compressing into that deadly still calm he had pretended to leave behind when he walked away from the teams. Instinct took over. He extended a hand toward Rex, silently directing him to the man on the left. Rex lowered himself, eyes locked, waiting for the signal. Jack stepped from the tree line, not bothering with stealth now. "You cut that rope," he said, his voice steady, "and I promise you, neither of you make it off this bridge." The men spun, startled, then sneered in unison. "Back off," one growled, brandishing the knife. "Not my day to back off," Jack replied, and gave a subtle gesture. Rex launched forward first, closing the distance in a single explosive surge. The man on the left barely turned before Rex slammed into him, knocking him flat, the knife skittering across the boards. Jack was already moving. He reached the second man before the surprise had cleared his eyes, driving his shoulder into the man's ribs and sending them both crashing into the railing. The impact jarred Jack's healing injuries, but pain was irrelevant. He pinned the man with a forearm, twisting the knife from his grip with quiet efficiency. "Who sent you?" Jack demanded. The man spat toward the swamp. "Doesn't matter. She snooped where she shouldn't." Jack didn't wait for more. He struck once, clean and controlled, knocking the man unconscious. The rope jerked above him, one of the knots giving way. Jack lunged and caught the woman's wrist just as the last fibers snapped. Her breath hitched in panic, body trembling as he pulled her over the railing and onto the boards. She clung to him in shock, barely able to form words. "You're all right now," Jack murmured, more gently than he expected from himself. Her breathing steadied enough for her to look up at him, eyes wide, frightened, but fierce beneath the fear. A survivor's eyes. There was more story inside her than she could tell right now, but Jack recognized the look. He had seen it in too many villages, too many broken places. Rex trotted back to Jack's side, checking the unconscious men before focusing on the woman with a protective stance Jack had not trained into him. It was instinct. Jack knew already. The quiet he had come here seeking had ended the moment her scream split the air, and whatever trouble she had been dragged into had now become his to face. The forest wind shifted, carrying heat, tension, and the lingering echo of the scream that changed everything. The late summer heat clung to the forest like a heavy blanket, the air wavering above the dirt trail as Jack Mason led the shaken young woman away from the bridge. Lila Hart walked unsteadily beside him, still trembling from the rescue. One hand braced on Rex's back as the dog moved with a steady, grounding presence. Jack had guided countless civilians out of chaos before, yet there was something different in the quiet determination behind her shock, like a flame refusing to be smothered. He didn't ask questions at first. Training taught him people needed silence before they needed explanations. But as they neared his cabin clearing, he noticed her glance repeatedly over her shoulder, eyes widening at sounds that were not threats. Wind against leaves, a snapping twig, Rex's low chuff. Fear mixed with something heavier. Guilt, maybe. Secrets always left a scent in the air. Jack stopped once they reached the porch, turning to her. "You heard anywhere?" Lila hesitated before shaking her head. "Just shaken." He nodded and opened the cabin door for her. Inside, the space was plain. Wooden walls, a worn table, a stone fireplace stacked with fresh logs. It was not comfort she needed, but safety. The cabin provided enough of that. Rex lay near the fire pit, panting quietly, keeping his gaze fixed on her the way he always watched those who didn't fully understand how close death had come. Jack grabbed a canteen, handed it over, then leaned against the counter with the posture of someone who had all night to wait for the truth. "Those men weren't amateurs," he said finally. "People like that don't just wander by. Start talking." Lila held the canteen tightly as though anchoring herself. "I wasn't supposed to be on that bridge today," she began, voice soft but trembling. "I've been tracking a group of illegal loggers operating deeper in the reserve. Not just logging, smuggling wildlife, rare minerals, whatever they can pull from the land." Jack's jaw tightened. Dangerous crowd to go after alone. "I wasn't alone," she said quickly, then looked down. "I had a camera, my only proof. Pictures of faces, vehicles, shipments, everything. I hid it at my old shelter in the woods when they chased me. But they found me before I could get back to it." Jack frowned. "So you've got evidence, and they know you have it." "Yes." Her voice cracked, but she steadied herself. "And if they get that camera before we do, everything I've risked becomes meaningless. People will disappear, evidence will vanish, and—" Her breath shook. Jack softened his tone. "You're safe here for the moment. That buys you time. But not much." Lila lifted her eyes to him. "I need to go back for the camera." Jack blinked at her for a long second before letting out a short, humor-laced breath. "Of course you do, because getting dangled over a swamp wasn't exciting enough for one afternoon." Lila stared at him, confused, until she realized he was teasing her. A startled laugh escaped her. The sound eased the steel tension in the room. Jack shrugged. "Look, I've walked into worse situations. Once had to crawl through a tunnel so small Rex refused to follow. And he's braver than 3/4 of the guys I served with." Rex gave a disapproving snort, which made Lila laugh again, tension dissolving into something warmer, more human. But beneath the humor, Jack's mind was turning. Evidence. Organized criminals. Someone desperate enough to stage an execution on a bridge. And the look Lila carried. The look of someone who had already decided to risk her life long before he ever showed up. Jack hadn't planned on being part of anything like this ever again, but he also hadn't planned on hearing a woman scream for her life in the middle of a peaceful forest. Plans didn't matter. What mattered was what felt right, and leaving her alone was not that. He straightened. "We'll go at dusk," he said. "I'll scout the perimeter. You stay close. Rex stays closest." Lila nodded with weary gratitude. "The shelter isn't far," she said. "It's a small ranger hut I used to work from. They probably don't know exactly where I kept the camera, just that I hid something." The wait until dusk dragged longer than Jack liked. He paced the porch, scanning the tree line, fighting the quiet dread that old instincts awakened in him, the feeling of being hunted. Rex felt it too, shifting restlessly, occasionally lifting his head toward the deeper forest. Something was wrong. When they finally left the cabin, the sky had begun its descent into amber gold, long shadows reaching like fingers across the ground. Jack moved first, Rex behind him, Lila between them, protected but nervous. The walk was short, yet tension made every minute heavy. When the ranger hut came into sight, a small wooden structure half collapsed from age, Jack raised a fist to halt them. "Rex," he murmured. The dog lowered into a cautious stance, nose lifting, listening. A faint movement shuddered the brush near the hut. Jack narrowed his eyes. Not wind, not animal. Human. Lila's breath hitched softly behind him, but he signaled for silence. Jack advanced, stepping lightly, and the shape resolved into a man, lean, tense, moving, with the cautious rhythm of a scout. A stranger, armed. He was searching the hut. Jack's pulse sharpened. "They got here first," Lila whispered. "Not necessarily," Jack replied quietly. But whoever he is, he's not looking for mushrooms. Another shadow appeared. Another man, broader, impatiently kicking at the hut's storage crates. They weren't just searching. They were expecting something to be here, or someone. Jack muttered under his breath, "Wonderful, a welcoming committee." Lila's fear trembled into her hands. "Jack, what if—" "Shh," he calculated quickly. "Two visible, possibly more out of sight. They hadn't spotted them yet, but the margin for error was razor thin." Jack felt the heat of impending combat building behind his ribs, an instinct that had saved him before but also haunted him. Fighting here meant exposing Lila. Retreating meant losing the only evidence she had. Neither option promised safety. He leaned close and whispered, "We won't engage unless we have to, but listen carefully. If this goes sideways, you run toward the creek bed. Stay low. Rex will lead you." Lila swallowed. "And you?" Jack didn't answer. Rex pressed against his leg, sensing the tension, ready to spring into whatever storm lay ahead. Jack watched the men, waiting for the smallest shift that would reveal their intention. Finally, one of them turned sharply, looking directly toward the trees where Jack, Lila, and Rex hid. His hand reached for his weapon. Jack exhaled once, long and steady. "So," he murmured, "that answers that." The forest seemed to hold its breath as danger crept closer, the hut standing half-collapsed under the dying light. Whatever happened next would determine whether they escaped with the truth, or lost everything before the real battle even began. Night settled over the forest with a heavy stillness, the kind that pressed close to the skin and muffled every sound beneath layers of darkness. Jack Mason guided Lila and Rex back toward the cabin with deliberate caution, keeping to the thicker brush, checking over his shoulder with every few steps. The two armed scouts they had seen at the ranger hut had been enough to confirm what he already feared. The criminals weren't searching blindly anymore. They were moving in patterns, controlled, informed, and dangerously confident. That meant someone higher up was coordinating the hunt. As they reached the ridgeline above the cabin clearing, Jack motioned for them to stop. Smoke from the chimney still curled upward in a thin trail, proof the fire he had banked before leaving hadn't fully died. Everything looked untouched. That worried him more than if the door had been kicked in. "Something's wrong," he whispered. Rex stiffened, ears tilting forward, his body lowering as he scanned the clearing. The dog's instincts rarely faltered. Tonight they radiated a sharp tension that prickled the hair on Jack's arms. Lila swallowed, her voice barely above a breath. "You think they're already here?" "If they followed us," Jack murmured, "they're close. If they didn't, they will be soon." He scanned the darkness, the tree line, the shadows beneath the cabin posts. Years of combat had taught him to see movement before it happened, to predict violence the way others sensed a change in weather. Tonight, the forest felt like a battlefield, holding its breath. Jack led them in a slow arc, approaching from the rear of the cabin where the slope offered natural cover. His plan was simple: retrieve the essentials, grab medical supplies, extinguish the fire, then disappear deeper into the mountains before the hunters converged. But plans rarely outlived the first shot. The first shot came without warning. A flash burst from the tree line, followed by the crack of a rifle. The round hit the cabin wall, splintering wood inches from where Jack would have stepped. "Down!" he hissed, pulling Lila into the dirt as Rex growled and pressed close. Another shot thundered, Someone yelled a command in the distance, the tone sharp and tactical. More than two men, more than scouts. Jack felt the weight of the moment settle in his chest. They weren't searching for Lila anymore. They were eliminating her. He shoved Lila toward a fallen log. "Stay behind that. Don't move unless I tell you. Jack, do it." His voice carried no room for argument. Rex stayed glued to Jack's side, the dog's focus narrowing to pure instinct. Jack slipped into the darkness, moving low, counting footsteps and angles. He spotted one shooter crouched behind a stump, a disciplined posture that suggested military experience. That made things worse. Organized criminals were dangerous, but criminals with trained soldiers were a different kind of threat entirely. Jack circled behind the shooter, struck hard, and dragged the man into the brush before he could cry out. But the victory came with a price. Pain flared through Jack's shoulder, old scar tissue tearing under the strain. He gritted his teeth, suppressing the noise. That wound had never fully healed, a reminder of the mission that had taken Mark Hart's life. A second shooter spotted movement and fired. Dirt blasted near Jack's knee, and he rolled, landing hard on his injured shoulder. Pain spiked bright and hot. Lila gasped from behind the log, but she stayed hidden, following his instructions with fierce discipline. Jack returned fire, not to kill but to force the shooter to cover. It bought Rex enough time to charge. The dog lunged through the darkness, hitting the man with powerful momentum. The shooter toppled backward, the rifle skidding across the ground. Jack limped forward to finish the fight, then froze as a third figure emerged from behind the cabin. This one moved differently, steady, purposeful, like someone who had spent years learning how to track prey through rugged terrain. The man's voice cut through the night. "We know the girl's with you, Mason. Step aside, and we'll make it quick." The sound of his name jolted him. They weren't just following Lila. They were hunting him now. Jack fired 2 quick rounds toward the voice, forcing the man into cover. He heard him curse and retreat behind the porch. Footsteps rustled near the cabin window, then another voice hissed, "Get inside! Grab the woman!" Leela stiffened. At the same time, Jack's stomach dropped. They thought she was undefended. They thought she was weak. They were wrong. A shadow slid toward her hiding place. Jack couldn't intercept in time. Pain slowed him, the distance too wide. But Lila rose from behind the log with sudden force, catching the attacker off guard. She pivoted, elbowed him hard in the ribs, then swept his legs from under him in a move too smooth to be instinctive. Jack stared, stunned, for a heartbeat. The training behind that move was unmistakable. She'd been taught by someone who fought like a soldier. She had been taught by Mark. Lila grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisting until the knife clattered from his hand. "Don't touch me," she hissed, voice shaking but powerful. The man tried to stand, but Rex crashed into him, knocking him flat. Jack reached her side, breath tight. "Where did you learn that?" Lila's eyes shimmered, fear, pain, and something far deeper. "My brother," she whispered. "Mark trained me, just in case I ever ended up in something I couldn't talk my way out of." Jack stumbled, the truth striking harder than the gunfire. Mark had a sister, and she was the woman he had just rescued from death. The forest seemed to tilt around him for a moment. The noise of the attackers regrouping snapped him back. "We have to move," he said, forcing the emotion down. "There's too many of them," Rex barked sharply, urging them to hurry. Jack grabbed a backpack from the porch, medical kit, compass, water, just as a bullet tore through the doorframe. They sprinted into the woods, branches whipping past in the darkness. Behind them, the cabin they had relied on for safety erupted under gunfire, wood cracking, windows shattering. Jack didn't look back. He didn't need to. Their refuge was gone. Ahead, the forest stretched into deeper darkness. Somewhere beyond it lay higher ground, somewhere they could call for help. But Jack knew the men behind them would not stop. Not now. Not after seeing them escape twice. And as he ran through the night with Lila and Rex at his side, wounded, hunted, and holding a truth he hadn't been ready to face, a single chilling thought tore through him. If they knew her connection to Mark, they would never let her live. The path narrowed into shadows, and the sound of pursuing footsteps grew clearer, closing the distance with every breath. Dawn filtered weakly through the treetops, casting scattered shafts of gold across the forest floor as Jack Mason pushed forward with Lila close behind and Rex sweeping the rear. The air was warm with the thick, humid breath of summer, carrying the scent of pine sap and damp soil. Though the forest had always been a place of refuge for him, this morning it felt like it was closing in. Tight, watchful, full of unseen eyes. The gunfight at the cabin hours earlier had left its mark. Jack's shoulder throbbed with every step, a deep rhythmic pain that pulsed through his arm. He refused to show how badly it affected him, but Rex noticed, glancing back at him with quiet urgency. Lila walked silently, but her eyes were sharp, constantly scanning the tree line. She had not spoken much since the moment Jack learned she was Mark Hart's sister. The truth had changed something, given weight to every step, every breath. After nearly an hour climbing the ridge, Jack signaled for them to stop. They crouched behind a fallen cedar whose trunk was thick enough to conceal them. The valley below stretched wide and deceptively peaceful, but the stillness was wrong. Too neat, too controlled. Jack saw signs instantly. Disturbed brush in repeating lines, glints of reflection where binoculars might catch sunlight, distant silhouettes moving with precision rather than randomness. "They've set a perimeter," Jack murmured. "We're boxed in." Lila swallowed hard. "All of this for me?" Jack's expression tightened. "Not just you. Whoever hired those men knows I'm here. That changes the threat." Rex let out a low grumble. Sensing Jack's unease, Lila's voice softened. "Your injury? Is it getting worse?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't want to lie, and he didn't want to burden her with the truth. The wound was spreading heat down his arm, and every impact earlier had torn deeper into muscle scarred from a mission he never spoke about. They needed a way out, and fast. Jack pointed toward a narrow ridge climbing sharply toward the north. "There's an old fire lookout up there. Should still have a working transmitter tower. If we can reach it, I can send an encrypted distress signal to my unit." Lila nodded, but her brow furrowed. "What if they reach it first?" "Then we take it back," Jack said simply. They moved again, this time with greater urgency. Jack's breathing grew rougher, the effort of climbing with a damaged shoulder draining his strength quicker than he expected. Lila noticed, but didn't comment. Instead, she shifted closer, subtly adjusting their pace so he didn't fall behind. For a woman who had nearly died the previous day, her resolve had crystallized into something steel-sharp. They made it halfway up the ridge before the first sign of danger appeared. A figure moved between the pines, steady, quiet, hunting. Not reckless like street criminals, but practiced. The man held a radio clipped at his shoulder and used silent hand signals toward someone unseen. Another trained operative. Jack cursed under his breath. They brought in reinforcements." The man saw movement and raised his rifle. Jack shoved Lila behind a boulder as bullets snapped through the brush. Rex surged forward with explosive force, not attacking yet, but flanking, pushing the shooter into cover. Jack fired a controlled shot, grazing the man's arm and forcing him to pull back. But the retreat didn't reassure him. It meant the attacker wasn't alone. Moments later, voices echoed through the gorge, organized, communicating in short-coded bursts. "They're closing the gap," Jack muttered. "We need to move." Lila touched his arm lightly. "You're losing blood. You can't keep this pace forever." "Don't worry about me," he snapped, then immediately regretted the sharpness. Lila didn't flinch. "If you fall, Rex and I can't drag you up that mountain. Be realistic." He looked away, jaw tight, because she was right. But slowing down meant death for all three of them. "There's a cut through the rocks ahead," Jack said. "If we reach it first, we can bottleneck them." They ran, weaving through boulders, Jack forcing his body forward even as black spots danced before his vision. By the time they reached the stone corridor, footsteps thundered behind them, multiple men closing in. Jack dropped to one knee, bracing his rifle with his good arm. Lila stood beside him, gripping a fallen branch like a staff, her stance balanced but tense. Rex positioned himself low, ready to intercept the first enemy who breached the passage. The attackers advanced, firing in controlled bursts. Bullets shattered stone around them. Jack returned fire, but his shots grew less steady, each recoil sending a wave of pain down his side. Lila grabbed his wrist. "Switch positions. I'll cover. You guide." He wanted to protest, but the haze creeping across his vision said otherwise. Lila fought fiercely, striking a man who tried to rush them, knocking him into the rocks where Rex finished the takedown. Another attacker lunged, grabbing her from behind, but she executed a clean drop step and threw him into the dirt, a move clearly learned from Mark. Jack's heart twisted as he watched her fight with techniques identical to her brother's, the same energy, the same precision. "Lila!" he shouted. She dove aside as a rifle butt swung where her skull had been. Rex leapt, clamping onto the attacker's arm, driving him to the ground. But the wind came with a consequence. Jack collapsed to one knee, breath jagged, blood soaking through his shirt. Lila rushed to him. Jack, stay with me." "Move," he gasped. "We're almost there." Behind them, more voices, more footsteps. The forest was tightening again, like a predator, savoring the moment before the strike. "We have to reach the lookout tower before they do," Jack said through clenched teeth. "It's the only place we can send a signal before they shut us down completely." Then Rex's ears shot up, growling, warning. A new sound slipped through the trees, the mechanical click of someone loading a grenade launcher. Jack's blood ran cold. "Run." Lila didn't hesitate. She pulled Jack up with surprising strength, Rex pushing at his legs to force him forward. They ascended the final ridge just as an explosion tore through the stone corridor behind them. The blast sent tremors across the ground, showering them with dust and debris. Lila shielded Jack with her body as Rex barked furiously at the fireball blooming behind them. When the smoke settled, Jack lifted his head weakly. Through the haze, he saw them, silhouettes of armed men spreading across the lower ridge like a tightening noose. And among them stood a tall figure giving hand signals with cold precision. Not a thug, not a smuggler, someone who moved exactly like a soldier. Lila followed Jack's gaze. "Who is that?" Jack's voice dropped to a rasp. Someone who knows how to kill a seal. She shivered. What do we do now? Jack stared toward the fire lookout tower, barely visible through the trees. We make our stand. First light crept over the mountain ridge, painting the fire lookout tower in pale gold as Jack Mason, Lila Hart, and Rex pushed up the final incline. The summer heat was already rising, thick and heavy, making every breath feel like it carried the weight of the earth. Behind them, the forest echoed with the coordinated movements of armed men, each footstep closing the distance. Jack stumbled, catching himself on a jagged outcrop. His shoulder pulsed with a deep, throbbing ache that spread down his arm, and the blood loss made the edges of his vision blur into pale fog. Lila caught his elbow, worry sharp in her voice. "Jack, you can't keep this pace." "I don't have a choice," he muttered. "We're out of time." Rex nudged against his leg, urging him forward with stubborn loyalty. The dog had fought relentlessly through the night, and though he had no visible wounds yet, Jack sensed the fatigue coiling beneath his focused energy. They reached the base of the tower, an aging metal frame that creaked in the morning wind. Its transmitter dish still pointed toward the sky, though half the wires looked weather-worn and rusted. Jack assessed it with a soldier's eye. "If the internal battery's dead, we're done." Lila squeezed his arm. "Then let's pray it hasn't given up yet." They climbed the ladder. Jack forced himself upward, despite the stabbing pain with every pull. Lila stayed close in case he slipped, and Rex paced below, whining anxiously with each clang of metal. At the top, Jack collapsed onto the wooden platform. The small control box sat crooked under the antenna mount. He pulled a panel open. "Still has power," he breathed. "Barely." Lila exhaled shakily. "Can you send a message?" "Yes," he said, fingers trembling, as he patched into the emergency military channel. "But they'll triangulate the signal the moment it goes out." "Meaning they'll know exactly where we are." "Exactly." Lila's eyes hardened. "Send it." Jack began transmitting a coded distress ping only used by active-duty SEAL units. He hadn't used it since the day Mark died. His throat tightened at the memory, but he forced it back. Not now. Not when lives depended on it. He sent the final burst of encrypted coordinates. Then the radio hissed, sparking as the battery failed. "It's out," he whispered. "But it should have been enough." Below them, voices erupted. Their pursuers had reached the ridge. Jack pulled himself to the rail and glanced down. A dozen men moved into the clearing, led by the tall figure from the night before. The man barked orders in a clipped, cold tone. This one wasn't a simple mercenary. His posture, method, and coordination suggested a history in covert ops. A shadow from someone's war. Someone who knew exactly how to corner a SEAL. "We'll hold 'em here," Jack said. "Buy time until my team shows up." Lila didn't argue, because she saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't sure he would survive long enough to see that moment. Gunfire crackled. Bullets clipped the tower supports, sending vibrations up the frame. Rex barked furiously, racing between railings as if searching for a path to leap down and defend Jack. Lila crouched behind a corner post, gripping a fallen metal bar she'd taken from the tower floor like an improvised weapon. Jack steadied his breathing, lifted his rifle, and returned fire. Every shot burned through his shoulder. Each one weakened him further. The attackers advanced behind natural cover, never exposing themselves for long. The leader remained calm, controlling his men with sharp signals, He wanted Jack alive until the final moment. Jack could read it in the methodical way the net tightened. A bullet slammed into the wooden panel beside Lila. She ducked, adrenaline surging. "They're going to breach the ladder," Jack shouted. "Stop them!" She rushed to the hatch. The first attacker climbed into view. Without hesitation, she swung the metal bar, knocking him back with a grunt. Rex lunged down the steps, meeting the next climber halfway. The dog struck with raw instinct and loyalty, forcing the man down in a tumble of limbs. Jack fired a burst toward the leader, forcing him into cover, but the moment cost him. Pain exploded through his side. He stumbled, dropping to one knee. Lila shouted, "Jack, stay with me!" Rex whirled, sensing Jack's falter, just as another attacker raised his rifle straight at the dog. Time seemed to slow. Jack's voice tore out of him. "Rex, no!" The shot cracked. Rex yelped, his hind leg buckling as the bullet tore into his thigh. He collapsed, but even wounded, he dragged himself in front of Jack, shielding him with trembling determination. Another gunman climbed the ladder. Jack surged forward, rage cutting through pain. He slammed the man aside, stole his weapon, and fired down into the crowd below with renewed fury. But rage couldn't outpace blood loss. His legs weakened. His breaths grew shallow. He fought with everything left in him, and then his body gave out. He collapsed beside Rex, his weapon clattering onto the planks. Lila screamed his name, but her voice felt distant to him, like echoing thunder, fading away. The leader stepped into view below the tower, raising his weapon for the final shot. "It's over, Mason." A new sound cut through the clearing, a low, rising thunder, helicopter blades, dozens of them. Lila turned toward the sky. "Jack, they're here." The tree line erupted as SEAL operators in full gear poured down ropes, forming a tightening ring around the attackers. Gunfire exploded in disciplined bursts. The mercenary leader turned, realizing too late the tide had shifted, and lunged to retreat, only for a SEAL sniper round to take him down cleanly. More operators surged up the tower ladder. "We've got him!" one shouted. "Wounded SEAL and K-9, top level, move!" Lila cradled Jack's head as operators reached them. One of them, broad-shouldered, steady-voiced, knelt beside Jack. "We've got you, brother. Stay with me." Rex whimpered, still trying to shield Jack even as medics moved in. "Easy, boy," another operator said gently. "We'll take care of him, too." As Jack drifted into unconsciousness, the last thing he saw was Lila's face streaked with tears, and Rex lying pressed against him, refusing to let go until the medics forced them apart. The mountain wind shifted, carrying the thunder of rescue across the ridge. That was the moment Jack finally let go. Sometimes help arrives in ways we never expect. Jack, Lila, and Rex survived not only because of courage, but because something greater was watching over them. In the hardest moments of life, when the road feels steep and the burden too heavy, God often sends quiet miracles, a helping hand, a burst of strength, or a protector placed in our path at just the right time. If this story touched your heart, share it, leave a comment, subscribe for more stories of hope and courage. May God bless you, protect your home, and guide your steps each day. God bless you and your family.